1. For context, I live in a home that is roughly 130 years old. It is hard to pinpoint exactly when it was constructed, since such records do not exist, but it is one of the oldest buildings within my town. And in its 130-year history, it has served many different roles such as a police station, a dentist office, as well as hosting many different residents. As for previously recorded paranormal events within the home, I am not aware of any that have occurred. I did not have contact with the previous tenants, and from town folklore there are no reports of hauntings occurring within the home. But regardless of lack of previous evidence, or perhaps, more aptly put, lack of recorded evidence, let me share what I have experienced within the nearly 2 decades I have spent in my home. The first event that occurred was what I consider to be sleep paralysis. This occurred for about the first 7 years, almost every single night. As I lay paralyzed in my bed, dark shadow figures appeared with horribly disfigured forms, their body less human, more akin to that of trees with sprawling branches. Though I was not afraid of seeing such things, I felt a strange sort of peace, almost as though they were guardians. But there was one that would appear that I did fear, a dark shadow figure, human in form, with no discernible features outside of the dark human silhouette. Now this could just be run-of-the-mill sleep paralysis, but none of the less, I wanted to share for the sake of context. Jumping ahead a few years, I began to hear knocking, something coming from inside the walls, and some, much like the experience I'm about to share with you, occurred outside the walls. As I walked down the hallway towards one of the bathrooms, which is the same hallway that used to lead to my previous bedroom, the one where shadow figures appeared a few years prior, I felt a sort of negative energy, but I brushed it off. Entering the bathroom and shutting the door, I then heard a rapid succession of knocks coming down from one end of the hallway. They were, at first, quiet. Then they grew louder, as they approached the bathroom door. Upon the knock that reached the door, the knock shook violently with a deafening sound. The knocks continued until they reached the end of the hallway, at which point they fell silent, and I've yet to experience a similar event. Now, to the past few weeks, I've noticed small things, odd occurrences with no seemingly negative intention behind them. In fact, they've actually been helpful. One example that stands out to me was when I was getting ready for a busy day, and every cabinet I went to opened by itself. Sometimes, before I even raised my hand to indicate which cabinet I wanted, it just swung open. Again, this house is 130 years old, so I'm still skeptical. Nonetheless, it is peculiar. I've always jokingly said that if there are ghosts within my home, they are perhaps the most boring ghosts I've ever witnessed. Other than the events I've stated, I recall nothing else. Thank you for listening, and I'm looking forward to hearing what y'all have to say. Have a good day, y'all. 2. When I was in high school, my mother was married to a man named Donald. Now, Donald was a drunk. He worked a good job and made good money, so he provided for us well enough. But he filled his free time chugging vodka like water in his underwear on the couch. Donald wasn't always aggressive when he drank. However, after a hard day at work, he would come home, drink a bottle, and try to pick fights with me or anything he could think of. Very often these fights would turn physical, and while I was no lightweight in high school, on the first occasion I fought back, he called the cops on me. As a result of this situation, once he was about 3/4 of the way through a bottle, my mother took to packing an overnight bag, having me load up, and going to stay in a hotel for the night. I always stayed in the same hotel just down the street from my house, since it would allow me to go back home before school the next morning, after Donald had left for work to get ready. It was a nice place with a huge open foyer that all of the rooms surrounded, going up 5 stories. I knew the ladies at the desk really well, as I was there 5 to 6 times a month. On the occasion in question, I had gone over fairly late in the evening. The hotel had 24-hour booking at the front desk, but the girl behind the desk mentioned that they were booked up for the night. I breathed an exasperated sigh as I was relayed the news, and mentioned I would just catch the bus a little ways uptown to go to another hotel. The girl behind the desk mentioned there was one room she could put me in, at a discounted rate no less. She was, however, hesitant to do so, saying the owner of the hotel had taken it out of service for reasons unknown to her, but that she knew I would be gone before the owner would arrive in the morning, and she could fudge it in the system to look like the room hadn't been occupied. I thanked her for this and accepted, not caring for the other options I had available to me at the time. So I got the key and went into the room, got undressed, showered, and settled into bed. I noted that despite her reservations, the room was immaculate. I simply couldn't fathom why a perfectly good room wasn't being rented out, but decided not to look a gift horse in the mouth. The room was pretty standard as far as hotel rooms go. A single queen-sized bed, a TV on the wall to your left, a desk to your right, a mirrored closet door across from the bed with a table next to it, and a ceiling fan just past the foot of the bed. I fell asleep sometime around 11 to the sound of the TV playing, some late-night cop drama, quite comfortable in the bed, until around 2:30. I wasn't awoken by a sound as much as a lack of sound. You never realize just how jarring it is until it occurs suddenly in the night. As I rolled to sit up, I took note of the time on the alarm clock and noticed that the TV had turned off. The room was illuminated by the light of the parking lot pouring in through the blinds, and as my vision sharpened and the room properly came into focus, I noticed that I was not alone. At the foot of the bed was a woman. She was wearing a hotel bathrobe. Her hair was darkened by water, as if she had just gotten out of the shower. And notably, she was quite tall, the top of her head just 2 feet or so below the ceiling fan. She stood at the foot of the bed with her head cocked to one side and stared at me. She didn't say anything. She didn't move. At some point during this exchange, I had convinced myself I was dreaming, and there was no woman in the room. So, despite her standing there and staring at me, I wasn't afraid. I had been having hyper-realistic dreams since I was a kid, after all. So I simply laid back down on my back and watched her stand there, my head tilted so I could keep an eye on her, knowing that if she wanted, she would simply disappear. And she did. I fell back asleep and slept through to my morning wake-up call. The lady at the front desk sounded a bit nervous when she called, so I quickly got dressed and headed out to the front desk, thinking her boss may be coming by sooner than expected. I wasn't expecting the conversation I had at the front desk as I checked out. When I walked up, she started apologizing to me. I was confused, so I calmed her down and asked her to explain what had her so stressed. She took a breath and said, "I found out why that room was taken out of service." Come to find out, 2 weeks before I stayed in that room, a woman stayed there while on vacation with her husband and 2 kids. She stayed behind while they went to grab breakfast one morning. She took a shower, put on her bathrobe, and hung herself from the ceiling with a bedsheet. Her husband found her there when he got back. The room was removed from service as a matter of good taste until the services were held. I didn't know any of this beforehand, and it makes me wonder, did I see her in my room that night, or was it really just a dream? 3. I worked night shift at a medical lab, where I had a bit of a creepy experience a while ago. There's an area of the lab called Stats where we process specimens that need to be tested immediately. It's kind of isolated from the rest of the lab, and usually there's only 2 people at this station. Earlier in that night, one of my coworkers and I were exchanging scary stories that had really happened to us. It got me in a really spooky mood, because we talked a lot about hauntings and paranormal experiences. At some point, when I was on break, I was walking down a long, empty hallway. My face was in my phone, and I suddenly felt like someone was walking right behind me. I thought it was my coworker, because he liked to prank me and scare me a lot. But when I turned around, nobody was there. The hall was completely empty, and there was nowhere anyone could have hidden, so that freaked me out a little, especially after talking about scary experiences with my coworker. But I didn't read into it too much, and figured I was psyching myself out. At some point between 2 and 2:30, I was working at my station when I felt a distinct tap, tap, tap on the back of my chair. I turned around and was startled to see no one there. The only other person nearby was my partner on stats, but she was working at another computer station a good 10 feet or so away from me. I had reacted to the tapping immediately, and there was physically no way she could have tapped in my chair and jumped back to her station in the split second it took me to turn around. That tripped me out, but again, I figured ghost stories had just psyched me up and I was imagining things. But that tapping felt very real. I remember hearing the sound right behind me and feeling my chair vibrate like someone was tapping on it. At this point, I should mention that phones aren't allowed at the stat station, so mine was in my locker, which was nowhere nearby. When I got off work around 4 a.m., I discovered that my girlfriend had been trying to call and text me for almost 2 hours. I called her back. She said how she'd had a nightmare where I was hurt, and it gave her really bad anxiety, and she'd been trying to call me to make sure I was okay. I assured her I wasn't hurt, and I got home safely and helped her calm down. Later on, I looked at her texts and calls, and I noticed that they started around 2:30. I asked her what time she woke up, and she said it was a little after 2. So she woke up within the same time frame that I thought I felt that tapping on my chair. It's most likely a coincidence. And again, I probably imagined the tapping because I'd been sharing ghost stories and psyched myself out. But I also don't necessarily disbelieve the supernatural. And ever since that experience, I love to entertain the idea that a ghost was trying to get my attention and be like, "Hey, your girlfriend needs you. Go check your phone." 4. This happened about 5 or 6 years ago with a girl I was dating. I've always been sensitive to the paranormal. As a kid, I used to see shadow figures in my childhood home. And from kid till about 19, I had experiences around that house and my aunt's house who lived right behind us. And the land was connected, so yeah, they traveled frequently. So I went to high school with this girl I always had a bit of a crush on. But our paths never really crossed like that. Fast forward to 2014, we linked up. And it was magical at first. We spent so much time together it was insane, and we talked about everything, including the paranormal. I shared stories, she shared some, including her telling me that she was being haunted by an entity. Like I firmly believe in, and had so many experiences with the paranormal, but I didn't think it was that serious. Why was I wrong? It started off subtle. When me and her would spend time together, we would lose time, which is a no-no when it comes to the paranormal. Once we took a nap holding each other, and when we woke up, we were so sore, like running 3 marathons sore. Later that same week, she was about to leave my house, like normal. Well, I had opened the door for her, and we were saying a final goodbye, and something slammed into the door. Keep in mind, no one was home but us, and we were in the middle of the room, making out, as you do, and no one was outside. I lived in an apartment complex, top apartment. Our neighbors had moved out 3 weeks prior, so no one lived next to us, and it was in the middle of a school day, so all the kids around there were in school. Besides that, there was nothing thrown at the door, and if someone did it and ran, we would have seen them. Before I go any further, one thing I forgot to mention is she could see it. She was always able to see it. I was the only one to feel his presence in the beginning, anyway. So continuing. The next incident happened at her house. We're getting a bit frisky. Her idea, I swear. But anyways, we were doing our thing, and I felt uneasy, like someone was watching us. but she stayed in the middle of nowhere, and it was like 2 a.m. Well, as we were holding each other, I asked her, "Was it here?" She said yes and pointed to the corner of the room. She said it appeared as soon as you came into the room. My skin was crawling after she said that. Later that night, or morning, when I was about to leave, we were sitting in my car talking, and she fell asleep while I was holding her. She was only asleep for maybe 3 minutes or so before she snapped awake and said it's angry, and I swear to God. This huge shadow figure came walking by my driver's side window. I'm 6'3", and this thing would have towered over me. And you know how when you're sitting in a turning lane waiting for the light to change? And let you turn? And like a semi drives by you and your car shakes from the G-force? Well, as the entity went by my car, it felt just like that. The next incident, we were about to go to a bar with her best friend and her boyfriend. I had just gotten off work and had come home to shower and change before we can go. When they picked me up at work, which is in a different town and county than where I live, we pulled into my apartment complex. There, that shadow figure was waiting as we turned in, and before someone says, "Maybe you were just seeing things," the driver, who was the boyfriend of my girlfriend's best friend, said, "There goes the ghost." We were all very shook because we were just in a whole other county, and here it is, just waiting for her, at my house. The last incident was the last paranormal thing to happen before we broke up. Her ex upset her really bad one night. Backstory, they have kids together, so them talking was very normal. Continuing on, it was storming really bad. I was pleading with her to just come over and stay the night at my house. She finally agreed and came over. It was like 12 a.m. at this point. We ate some junk food, watched a movie, and fell asleep. I wasn't awake for this. She told me that at some point she heard like a tapping on my bedroom door, and a voice which sounded like her mom telling her to come out of the room. Now, her mom, 1, didn't know where I lived, and 2, she was in Ohio, visiting a sick relative now. Oh, by the way, we were in Florida, so assuming that my girlfriend told her mom where I lived, and also lied about her being out of state, and also gave her a key to my house somehow, or she just made this whole thing up, which I also don't know why she would. We weren't even talking about the entity that night. 5. About 10 or so years ago, I have the house to myself, still living with parents at the time, and I have a friend staying over. The night is going smoothly and normal. We're playing co-op video games, as teenage boys do. But eventually, we both end up on our phones scrolling through Tumblr. My friend stumbles upon a 40 to 50-minute audio tape file of a private investigator talking to a high school campus about his experience during a murder investigation he's conducted. I believe it took place in Texas, if I recall correctly. Long story short, towards the end of this audio file, it all leads up to the PI believing that the victim was exposed to a demon or evil entity, who was the reason for the death of this person. He states at the very end testimony of this case that this demon feeds off of your fear, and the more you think about it, the stronger its energy and presence gets. As far as we could both tell, it was a real testimony and not a parody or a creepypasta. So me and my friend hear the whole 40 or so minutes of testimony. We were just enthralled, almost hypnotized by it. And afterwards, we tried to go back to playing our games. Well, not 5 minutes later, the power in my room, and my room only, goes out. No big deal, so I just go and flip the breaker and turn it back on. 3 minutes later, boom, again. Flip the breaker again. 1 minute later, boom, again. This continues with shorter time frames until the power in my room just won't come back on. The first time it happens, we think it's mere coincidence. But by this point, fear is really happening, and the thought of this entity is in our heads. At this point, about 12 or 1 a.m., my friend decides that this isn't worth it for him, and he heads back to his place. Thanks, leaving me by myself. So the night goes on for a little bit, and after my friend leaves, I spend the rest of the night in my living room, lights on, and crash on the couch. I wake up with the TV still on, and it's between 3 and 4 a.m. and I don't know what the fuck possessed me to go back to my room to sleep, but for some reason, I convinced myself it's all in my head and head to my bed to sleep. I fall asleep incredibly fast, and my dream begins with me in my bedroom, and the room, just like it was laid out in real life, in the pitch black, was extremely vivid, an exact replica of my room. I was as lucid as I would have been awake, but in one of the top corners of my room where the wall meets the ceiling, I saw a pair of angry, dirty, yellow-looking eyes that were on a pitch blacker-than-black figure hanging on my ceiling, just staring into my soul. I was fixated on those eyes, and they were fixated on me. I was just in shock and couldn't move. But the second I tried to move at all, the shadow figure zoomed to another corner of my ceiling and then launched at me. I woke up in a sweat just before I get contacted. The dream felt so fucking real and vivid, and I woke up literally screaming. There was a real sense of dread that took over my entire body in that moment. I felt mentally and physically sick. Power was still not working in my room, so I went out to the living room again and finished the night with all the lights on, not sleeping at all. Nothing more ever came from that night, but as far as I can tell and find, that audio tape never existed. I spent days upon days trying to find it multiple times over the internet, and nothing even comes close upon search results. By the way, the power to my room worked perfectly the following day after the sun rose, and has worked perfectly ever since. I've tried so many times to explain it rationally, and to find the audio tape we listened to that night, and to this day, I haven't even come close. Neither has my friend. But we both remember the night like it was yesterday. Thanks for listening, and sticking around this long. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 5 True Paranormal Stories, episode 269. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. And please do share the video around, it's very helpful when you do so. Alright, let's see, no birthday shoutouts today, I don't think. What today's date? Nope, no birthday shoutouts, okay. Alright, let's see, Hellfreezer's question of the day. Let's keep it on theme, shall we? If you have the opportunity to buy a house, and you discover it is haunted by a ghost, not necessarily an aggressive ghost, just one that makes its presence known, is that a feature or a deal breaker for you? Or would a good discount on the house be tempting enough for you? For some folks, that might be like having a roommate, and for others, a very bad thing indeed. Alright, and with that, I'm gonna head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourself.